So today, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do you guys ever wonder who made the popular expensive clothing, shoes, or bags you guys wear today? Well, here's some of the new brands or brands that you guys may recognize. How would it make you feel if I told you that a 9-year-old, mostly women, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in poor working conditions, making those popular brands that you just see right here, so she won't starve at night? Today, I want to educate about the poor working conditions in developing countries where factories owned by huge industries violate their employees to shorten the cost of manual labor. First, we will talk about the sweatshops, the history, the efforts to improve, and where sweatshops are today. A sweatshop is a factory or a workshop, especially in the clothing industry, where manual workers are employed at a very low wage for long hours. A working environment that possesses of three characteristics: long hours, low pay, and unsafe or unhealthy work conditions, some restricted to bathroom breaks, and also leads to violence or sexual assault. Here's some of the pictures of what the sweatshops look like. Usually it's most boys and girls, and it's always overcrowded. It usually has no air conditioning. They don't get bathroom breaks. They only get one lunch, and they work extra hours. And basically what they do for the expensive clothing brands, they only get paid like 60 cents a piece. Next, I will talk about the word sweatshop comes from the margin of the actual fact that they sweat during these working hours, because they are feared and intimidated to actually make a union and stand up for themselves for their actual rights. So the history. One of the earliest examples of sweatshop was in the crude textile of mills in Ecuador. The Spanish conquerors put the native population to work in sweatshops, conditioning to manufacture the clothes, rough garments, and assorted textile goods. Continuing with the migration, in the 1880s, it became common for the Americans to come over, and since the population grew, they needed to feed their families, so they wouldn't say no to the jobs. Last but not least, the efforts to improve. The initial effort to improve began in the United States in 1844 with the new legislation in the state of New York. Sweatshops have a long history in the U.S. However, the author of Upton Sinclair, he wrote a book called The Jungle. I don't know if you guys read it. I read it in high school, which was intended to draw attention to working conditions. The book is based off of the production of food, of how it was, how workers would also work long hours outside and usually die of heat strokes. How this works? Well, the global production system forced contractors to cut the cost and increase productivity, and they meet the delivery within a short amount of time. So I hope you guys can see this. So the shirt that it costs you $70 at a retail store, the outwork, who is the people who are working in those sweatshops, get $3 off of it, and then it goes to the contractor who they hire, who hires you guys, that hires the people. They get $10 off of that. The subcontractors who get paid to sell to the fashion house gets paid $6. The fashion house gets paid $12, and then the retail gets $39. So the actual store that sells those clothing gets $39. Where are sweatshops today? They still exist today, and the fear of intimidation hasn't gone away completely. They have been creating a system where workers and communities can speak through their own and independent organizations. Mostly what they do is that it was hard for them to actually stand and speak up because they didn't speak English and they couldn't write or read. So now that the population is growing and they're more aware of the stuff, people start protesting and actually start buying clothing from brands that don't have workshops, or if they do, make sure that the workshops are appropriate for the workers that are working.
So Martin, what did you think?
I like how it started with all the brand, the picture of all the brand. And there's like a lot of good information, like a lot of very descriptive on the sweatshops and like what happens there and what's gonna happen or like to improve it. But sometimes like too much information just from the note cards and less from like actual knowledge and like telling the class. So just the note cards kind of threw me off. But other than that, there was a lot of information. All made sense.
Okay. There is a little bit more reading than you want to have going on, which is odd because I think one of the things that you're not reading is any source citation in the material. I didn't hear any sources being cited except for the one reference to The Jungle, which is a book that is 100 years old at this particular point. So it obviously isn't describing what you're talking about today when you get to that last section. So you need to be more consistent on that. I mean, you start off, I thought, really well. I'd agree with Martin about the visual with all the brands on it, and then you're talking about, you know, the negative things that are associated with sweatshops. And I like the picture of the sweatshops. I thought that those were pretty effective at conveying, you know, the crowded conditions that you're dealing with. Although the list of all the negative things about the sweatshops, this is where you need to have some of that information. Because let's face it, if any manufacturer is going to have crowded conditions, you know, they want to use the least amount of space that they can because you have to pay for that sort of thing. So the question then becomes, are they overdoing it? Have they overbooked it? Have they got 200 people in a room that's really only could manage 100 people or something like that? And it's a little hard to tell from the pictures. I get the idea. There are a lot of people working. There's a lot of work to do. But you know what? I walk into my office sometimes and look around and go, I feel like this is a sweatshop. It's 2 people in this room. It's a little crowded, and I barely have room to turn around in. But that's not really what the criteria is. You have some other criteria, for example, about, you know, the number of hours that they work, the low wages they get paid, the lack of air conditioning, for instance, or access to bathroom, that sort of thing. And that's, I think, where we need some more of that data. We need to have more of the proof that you're talking about and some way of assessing it. You mentioned they work long hours. Well, what do you mean by long hours? They work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, they work 8 hours a day, they get no breaks. If these are averages, for instance, then there's some statistical data that would go on to that. That people work in crowded conditions, that happens, but that they're working in crowded conditions for 8 hours without a break, that's what makes it a sweatshop. So let's get some statistics in there that show us that that's exactly what's going on, or some authoritative testimony about this. It sounds to me like you've got some connection here to material from organized labor that's talking about these kinds of issues, so I'm sure that they're going to give you that kind of information, and so you ought to be able to cite them. There are a couple places where they have done this kind of thing, or they are doing this kind of thing, or that happens. And I'm going, well, how do you know any of this? Who are they? And it just seems very abstract when you're talking about this information. It needs to be a little bit sharper. So the strong part is in the introduction. I think you had a good attention device, very clear identification of the topic, an excellent thesis statement. The preview is a lot like what I was mentioning earlier with Diego about it's mechanical. I can tell that you're doing the preview here, but it sounds so hit spot A, hit spot B, hit spot C, that it comes off as a little bit unnatural. And so that'll be something that you will go with practice. I think internally, though, that you need to signpost a little more clearly. I think you're kind of relying on our following along with the visuals to figure out where you are, and I think you need to kind of explain that as well. It's organized. I can tell that there are dividing points there, but you need to kind of lead us through that a little bit more. I think you understand a couple of things about some of the visuals. You mentioned it. I think the shirt example that you have there with the different slices of where the money is going is a good idea. It's almost impossible to see because there's not enough contrast and it's too small. That would be something where let's get rid of the other half of the image, make this image larger. If you had to copy it out or something like that and reduce things, that probably would have been worth the effort to spend some time on that so that it's making the point that you want. People listening, they're going to hear those sorts of things, but there's a good example of how it's like a pie chart without the slices of the pie. you know, and if you wanted to be a little bit more creative, for example, you could have a T-shirt chart, you know, so you could have the slices of the T-shirt, you know, here's one sleeve, and that represents, you know, the $10 that goes to this group, and then here's the front panel, and that represents what goes to the retailer, you know, and then here's the whole other side of the shirt that represents, you know, that kind of thing. So just creative things. That's extra work, I know, but those are the kinds of things that add value to what you're doing. They make your presentation more distinctive, and it means that you're doing something more and making the effort. And I think that everybody wants to do that. Everybody should want to do that. You want to. I mean, this is your assignment. I know some of you are just going through the motions. Let me get through this as quickly, as painlessly as possible. But you should have some enthusiasm about what you're doing, and put in a little bit of extra effort. It's not that anything that you did was wrong. I'm just thinking, what else could you do to make it, you know, better and spectacular? And that's just something that occurred to me while I was just sitting here talking about it. I think, oh, you could do that. That would be so much fun, you know, and you know, brainstorm those kinds of ideas. So when you get the subject, when you've done your research, you put it together, start asking yourself, what else could I put into this? How else could I make this distinctive and more personal and interesting? And I think that those are good choices to make. And that's one of the reasons that you want to use your groups. And the earlier you start on the process, then the more time you have to do those kinds of things. If you're putting, and I don't know when you finish, you know, that sort of thing, but so it's not about you. This is for everybody. The earlier you're done with the basics, the more time you have to add value to your presentation. And I think that that's the thing that really distinguishes people who are excellent speakers from those who are doing a credible job, but you know, they're just doing a job instead of you know, really connecting with the audience. All right, thank you.